The distinguishing thing about humans is they create things that never existed before. It's truly what separates us out, the ability to imagine something that never existed and bring it into being. Now, whether that is a made object, an experience, a conversation, it's the unique gift is to contribute to reality something that never before existed. So if there's a particular thing we want to nurture in people, it's the ability to do that to the fullest of their capabilities and powers. And that project, children do naturally. Our task is to how to enable them to do what they do naturally to the fullest extent possible.
I think one of the great principles of education is making mistakes. And indeed, the concept of making a mistake is the thing you should somehow minimise to the point you should almost be joyous about making a mistake. At the highest level of art, you know, whether you're writing a piece of music or executing fantastic dance or making a film, you want to get close to making a mistake in order to really extend yourself. I think that applies to children.
I believe that life is about expression and communication and sharing, and a lot of those ideas are to do with well-being. For without health as a broad well-being concept, you have nothing. And if we begin to break down our lives into very small compartments from a very, very early age, and we don't integrate joy and play and experimentation and self-discovery in relation to other people, I think that breaks down a fundamental thing about how humans function, how they connect, how they gain regulated behaviours. And the arts in an integrated lifestyle do it very beautifully.
We often get too caught up in fixed standards around literacy and numeracy, which have their place, but I think for a lot of children, having the opportunity to be creative and innovative and to play, to role play, to take time away from what might be seen to be highly intellectual into something that is more open to interpretation and more childlike, provides a different set of opportunities.
I think one of the great delights of being alive is to watch children make, to take things and transform them, to pull from their burgeoning little imaginations surprising things. And I think what we know now is that for children who will grow up in the 21st century, that's a uniquely valuable gift. And in developed countries, even more so. It will be possible to actually, produce things all over the world, but to create the new thing, the thing that hasn't been there before, the experience, the product, whatever it is, that requires bold acts of imagination. And if we are to have interesting jobs and lives in this century, it will hinge, I think, more than anything else on how good an imagination we have.
My starting point for the conversation would be to step outside of Western culture and look at some experiences I've had in South Africa. So, for instance, since the recent dawn of the Rainbow Nation, there's been a lot of work done in curriculum development there to regain traditional cultural practices. So in school, children are taught traditional arts practice separate to their Western curriculum, but that is trying to make this bridge between the two things. And what I see reflected in that environment is how meaningful those traditional arts still are for those children, because they've got a direct family connection, then they've got an extended family connection, a village connection, a tribal connection. So it gives one a sense of identity, an attachment to place, culture, meaning and value for life. So those things are terribly important.
I think this has always been the issue from artistic educators' point of view, that you're competing for space within what gets taught, but also what gets taught to the teachers. And a lot of our teachers might have wonderful enthusiasms and desire to be able to work with artistic things with the children, but they haven't had the opportunity to find out, you know, in a professional way what's involved.
There's not one school, there wouldn't be one school in Australia that hasn't got written somewhere some of the values that they think are really important to them and their school community. I worked in the values area for a number of years, and the thing that was often most interesting was the way in which those schools reached their consensus around values. And quite often they didn't reach a consensus. Values were often determined by the adults in the schools, and they didn't necessarily involve the students. So one of the things that was really important for any school that wanted to do values education seriously was to actually involve the students.
Sometimes I think that the core subject of curricula should be design. The ability to think about things that are needed in the world and find new ways of creating them. You know, we all can take delight in things that we know are beautifully and well designed, and who doesn't want to pick up an iPad and prefer it to some other tool because it feels nice, because our way of interacting with it is an experience of pleasure as well as great functionality. The things that we come to kind of cherish are those experiences where design is richly present. And design is really just a disciplined way of taking the imagination and applying it to things that we need in the world, or creating new things that people discover they need or value. And to create people who can do that, I think you have to begin early.
When I was 8 years old, we did a project about Australia and New Zealand, and we learned lots about the cultural practices of Maori people, for instance, and we learned the songs and dances. We learned about the animals, we made them, we experimented with how they might move, and so on and so forth. So all these things are sort of infiltrating the person to get value-added learning benefit. And, well, what's that about? Well, there are theoretical constructs that say within each person there are rather more natural proclivities towards certain ways of thinking, doing, being, and what you need to do is contact the individual on their natural strength and build from that to infiltrate all the other areas. So some people are rather more strong in the visual perception, others in the oral perception, others in their kinesthetic awareness and the sense of self in terms of the place they're in and their contact with it. And some people are very much more living in their thoughts.
What I observe is that when young children are taught the depth of the idea, which is philosophy's task, to take ideas seriously and treat them with the kind of rigour that they need, children really embrace that. If you're skillful at introducing ideas to children, I think they often do it far ahead of what, you know, traditional pedagogy would say. What stage they can have those ideas. But it's like creating a toolkit by which they can then engage with the world. And I don't think in fact, sometimes people sort of think there's a tension between the well-ordered mind and the imaginative mind. And I actually think this is one of many false dichotomies that infects kind of educational thinking. I think, in fact, they go together, because the more capable of having a disciplined mind people are, the more they've got that capability, the more they're then able to use it and create with it. It's a bit like with music. If you understand the rules of music really well, the chances of creating great music are accelerated. You truly know the art, the discipline, all that it takes to organise sound and to do new and unimagined things with sound. But boy, you've got to understand the rules, and the better you understand them, the bolder you can be.
When you get a principal who's willing to try and figure a way, especially by bringing in guests and people who may be able to at least give some technical knowledge or some confidence about the art side. I mean, these people obviously know about the education of young people, but to be confident about what you need, and sometimes it may not be much. You know, the idea that a lot of people don't feel comfortable even singing, particularly in our society, well, that's the fundamental musical expression, singing and dancing. And so if you yourself don't feel confident about that when you're with 8-year-olds, that might be a fairly big factor. If the teacher doesn't naturally sing or play, clap, drum, you know, I think that's pretty important.
It's very clear that everyone who's significant in the life of a child are one of their educators. Obviously parents, but other members of their world are educators. Our challenge is that schools, the whole way we think about schooling is not set up on that premise. The modern school is an industrial solution to an industrial challenge. How do we educate en masse very large numbers of people? Schools are still, even the best of them, based on a factory model. We process batches of people, you know, just as we process batches of anything, using an essentially standardized process during slightly less than normal factory hours for slightly less than a normal factory time the factory operates through a year. I mean, this, I think, compartmentalizes education in a way that defies the reality of learning itself. Learning just doesn't operate that way. So we kind of can learning just as we can tomatoes. And I celebrate everyone who attempts to kind of break that paradigm. Inevitably, that makes taking the parent as the first educator incredibly seriously, something I don't think we do nearly enough of in terms of supporting and skilling and including and engaging. Now, the part of it is our whole community isn't set up to do that. The lives of parents, you know, 2 parents busily working, the time available is incredibly constrained. So as a community, I think we also need to take seriously, if we are engaged in the world of raising children for the kind of world we have, how we, at a community level, organise our lives so that it's different to that.
I am a trained primary school teacher and taught classroom practice after I did my music and dance degree. And my experience of working with a broad range of children in the classroom, not teaching specialist music, but teaching the arts and maths and everything in as integrated a manner as I could, was that there are certain aspects of music, like musical rhythms, for instance, that are very good transfers. So they help young children gain coordinative skills, they help them collaborate. If we're just walking along the street, we will then train to the rhythm of the person we're with. So if we're working with a partner, we learn to be at one with that person. And of course, you can do other things with body movement and trust and give each other weight and learn about rather subtle social behaviours through experimenting in these ways.
With the made arts, if you know the rules really well, you can make the choice whether to break them or not. You have an understanding of what the depth that you can take something to. So I'm one who thinks that, in fact, these are complements, not opposites. To make sure they stay complements, though, I think the experience needs to be rich, so that you have a chance to keep viewing the world from different vantage points. And that, I think, is where giving children an opportunity to walk in other people's shoes is so important, because that's what enables them to look at things from different vantage points. And the task of education to give people that imaginative possibility to walk in the shoes of other lives and see what they're about, and other cultures and other environments. I mean, you know, we disconnect so much. You know, our lives, particularly city lives, become so about what cities are about. I love cities and celebrate them, but you don't really know what cities are about unless you really know what the country is about, and you don't really understand what happens in cities unless you know the deep processes by which all of this stuff came to be transformed from natural landscapes to human ones. So I think children need that rich set of perspectives, and that's what avoids the hardening of the categories. you can step out and see the world from all of these different lenses.
I guess one of the other things that we have to deal with in schools is there's so much material that can come in ready-made, film, TV, and so forth. And it's very easy that music and art become passive. Play a video, look at someone else's painting. I think if you're talking about the philosophical issue, which is the place of artistic expression in a life, I think it has to start with action. You know, in other words, that you have an activity that then the kids and the teachers talk about. And if we don't have the activity talking about someone else's art, even someone just outside the school, I think becomes qualitatively different.
Listening's wonderful, or watching's wonderful, but engagement is where real active learning and change can happen.
What if I do this?
For children growing up, the first thing is to enable them to defy categories. Education can so quickly and dangerously become about learning other people's ways of ordering reality. And we need to enable people to order reality in new ways. And I'm struck by the smallest ways in which, if you give children the freedom and space, they invent categories that you never thought about. My children at the moment have just taken a fascination about collecting stamps. Now, apart from the wonderful sense in which there is physicality and a tangible connection with lots of different places in the world, and that material connection you discover still matters hugely in an age of the cyber world. But the delight is to watch how they choose to order this collection and to see them think of ways I would never have thought about in terms of reconceiving how you can order the world by reordering stamps. So traditionally, people will organise these by countries and years. That was not their starting point. The categories that were important to them were things like creatures. So they wanted to assemble all of the things that were creatures in one place. And they decided they wanted to assemble made objects. Now, that spanned the spectrum from pieces of art to pieces of industry. Free to create your own categories, you just see the world freshly and differently. And I think we have to equip children with the thinking tools to be able to do those kinds of imaginative things.
You know, there was a survey done, I can't remember the exact nature of it, but I'm stuck in my mind. It involved asking young children whether they performed music. And they went into an area where they did ask the question. And they got a lot of answers from young children, 8 and 9-year-olds. When you ask, now, do you play music? Oh, no, I don't play music. And then later they discovered that this little person had been learning the piano or playing. Oh, but that's not real playing. That's just me learning to play or trying to play. So in other words, the kids already had been intimidated in this notion that the people on television and the stars, they were playing music and what I did wasn't music. That's another symptom of the fact that we forget that everybody's musical. Everybody can tell a story. There's levels of success about that, but it should be an expression. And even at university, we can't tell who's going to make the expression that has the impact, that affects many people.
A lot of people like to play with ideas. They like to have the chance to experiment and to do things which aren't being overly judged. And I think the arts offers a real opportunity for children, particularly if you're developing values, to explore and to play with ideas. As an ex-drama teacher and someone who had some fairly tricky classrooms in my time, I know that you can do an awful lot of interesting work with children who, under normal circumstances, might not disclose very much, but in a dramatic way or in a role play or in some form of drama will be able to explore things like respect or anti-bullying or intercultural understanding, where we may not be able to do that as easily in some of the other areas of the curriculum.
There's no doubt that the essential literacy and numeracy are vital life enablers, and the challenge for Australia is that the distribution of capability around that is too wide. And there is, I think, a vital project to make sure that all of our schools enable all of our children to achieve levels of literacy and numeracy that open the world up to them. Absolutely, absolutely critical. That we do it by testing is, right now, we would struggle to find a better way, given that that's a community project. The danger is that if that becomes the project, and that anyone would construct a primary school so that it comes at the expense of all of the other vital tasks. The future child will need to be, yes, very literate and numerate and very imaginative. This is not a choice. These are complements. The challenge is to find ways in which we bring those two projects together. And I'm struck in primary schools that I've observed where I think this is done well, where NAPLAN isn't an end in itself, and merely an attentiveness to the literacy and numeracy tasks infuses other projects, and so that there's a really conscious attempt to not make this an either-or. And I think that's our creative task as educators, to make sure that we are helping our children achieve the standards that will unlock the world to them, while continuing to nurture their creativity. It is entirely possible to teach, to literacy and numeracy and close out the rest of the world, make that a kind of project that is limiting, create levels of anxiety and dysfunction that are wholly unhealthy. But I don't think that's necessary. It's just a challenge to our imagination and skillfulness as educators.
A few weeks ago, I was in the slums of Mumbai in India, and I went to a music school that was a room at best 20 or 30 square metres with about 40 kids in it, and the people running the school are of the slum with some expertise and a great deal of enthusiasm. And what they do is they learn songs, and they're done in a very joyous, involved way by people they know, people in their community. And the communities are, from our eyes, with rubbish and smells, and these kids, not many of them go to school. So this is like an extreme example of how a simple thing like learning a song, which is often about language and about communication, I just thought it was a fantastic afternoon.
And I think something that I've found or have found very valuable working with young children is how they can gain insight into meaning and understanding of themselves within a cultural context. So, for instance, again, to cite my vendor people from South Africa, there are certain bits of cultural knowledge that they can only gain through doing them in music and dance. Those bits of information don't exist anywhere else. It could be through storytelling, would be another means for that. And I think getting the meaning value of why you're engaging in the arts is vital. And I always recall working on a project with 7-year-olds, and we were trying to understand the emotional impact of certain movies or TV programs on us. And I got the children to create their own soundtracks to some of their favourite TV programs. So we would do a little trailer of whatever it was, a wildlife program, and the children using their resources, their voices, percussion instruments, real-world objects that they might make sounds with, made their own soundtracks. And that was very important, and it let them understand where the meaning is coming from in the artwork when it's connected to something else. And then, of course, you can abstract that, and it can become a piece in its own right. But as a sort of developmental stage for children, to attach it to something, I think, is a very powerful way of learning.
We need a much greater fluidity between what happens in home, community, and in places where children might come together, where learning has a particular focus. So I think schooling needs to come closer to home. So schools need to be more local places. At the moment, we truck kids all over the city to get them into school. That immediately kind of denies us a big set of learning opportunities that happen where more children can be close to walk to school, be accessing the school, be accessing the community that they're a part of as part of their learning. And within school, I think we have to dissolve a lot of boundaries. I think the kind of ways that we do see things working is, inquiry-based learning. And, I think things like, the International Baccalaureate's Early Years program, which is much more focused around inquiry-based learning. There are some terrific progress as you start to bring together multi-dimensional inquiry into things children are fascinated about. So learning stops being about a classroom and becomes about a project that is truly exploratory and which children can express their learnings in a whole range of media. I think that's exciting. If you look at what happens in the Reggio Emilia schools in Italy, where again, right from the earliest years, children invited into a multimedia investigation of things as beautiful as, as water or sunshine, and these are, early years learning, you start to see it appearing very differently. And then when you do that, then the age kind of barriers start to kind of evaporate. And it's not obvious that children should be operating with another group of children of their own age. Once it becomes about a project, of course they just should be operating with the range of other children and young people who can go with that project together. And the teacher is repositioned no longer as the guru, but as the facilitator. They're the guide on the journey. They're no longer the oracle. Teachers can never be oracles anymore because knowledge moves faster than they can move. But they can become wonderful kind of models of inquirers who possess some real thinking skills to help make sure that that kind of disciplined thinking happens and the inquiry is rigorous and the expression of their learnings has real excellence to it. So I think, in a sense, schools become playgrounds of inquiry, places where groups of children are gathering, guided by learning facilitators, who we once called teachers, to explore the world, to learn the big ideas, the things that they will carry throughout the rest of their life, to expand their imaginations. Because we've torn down these ghastly school buildings with their box-like classrooms and factory-like structures and built beautiful places which are open and can be reconfigured and people can use and interact with and manipulate to turn them into what they need them to be for the inquiry that they're engaged in. And those spaces in some schools already starting to exist as people are pulling down the walls of their classrooms, recognising that we need to create very different spaces and the inside-outside divides need to evaporate and the big and small space things need to start to be much more richly expressed. So I do think it's possible, and I think bold schools in little patches here and there are doing it, and we need to celebrate that and accelerate it and encourage it.
Are you? Are you? Are you? Now put your hands up and believe in yourself and don't copy no one else. Now everybody wanna count after 3, let's all clap 2 times, not 3, not 4, only 2 times. 1, 2, let's go. One more time, again, 1, 2, let's go. This time we're gonna go like this, clap, clap, down this way, clap, clap, and down that way. Let's see how we go. 1, 2, let's go. Down this way, down that way, keep going, down this way.
There are wonderful little hopeful moments where people say, well, in addition to literacy and numeracy of a kind of analytic kind, we've got to get some emotional intelligence and emotional literacy involved. But given the centrality of that to a thriving life, it's a kind of, I think history will look back and say, how is it that so little time in the long stretch of time people spent in school, how could it be that only one part of the human brain got the serious treatment and the rest of it, which is fundamental to life, well-being, success, is ignored, particularly when it's such a rich environment for that kind of project to be undertaken.
Harmony Day is a day to celebrate Australia's diversity. A day of cultural respect for everyone who calls Australia home.
Sharing. Kindness. Play together and have fun together. Caring. That everybody is together and they share. multicultural community because it's about the different cultures and countries coming together to this beautiful country. So I think we need to celebrate that.